not to show I knew French, but to show I was a certain kind of English speaker. Classes in dead languages also fed a certain kind of English. Latin and ancient Greek appeared as codes to crack, things to master, lists to memorize and unlock worlds. A smattering of Hebrew at Hebrew school was neither fully dead nor really alive, poised uncertainly between the ancient and modern languages. It felt safer to explore a language if there was no one you could speak it to. If reading is about pressing headlong and half-conscious into a mess of meaning, we didn't even read so much as decipher, where it's the romance of a person alone in a room, Champollion with the hieroglyphs, Ventris the architect tinkering with linear B after work, incommunicado while cracking ancient communication. Language as form, which is the beginning of linguistics. In college, I tried inhaling Old Norse, Uyghur, Luo, Russian, and Arabic, racing like a bucket list traveler to stamp the pages of my linguistic passport. Above all, I threw myself into Mandarin, keen to go up against its proverbial difficulty. Speakers themselves now know it as Guoyu, national language, Putonghua, common speech, Zhongwen or Hanyu, Han, Chinese language. But Europeans call it Mandarin from an old Indic word for counsel, same root as mantra, that passed through Portuguese in the 17th century and came to mean a type of orange, a senior official, the icy detachment of such officials, and eventually the form of Chinese those officials spoke, Guanhua. Just one of countless spoken varieties under the heading of Chinese, Mandarin is still distinguished in part by its strangely officious flavor, now with a communist twist, simultaneously austere and vacuous, intimidating yet elusive, in short, stuffy and puffy at the same time, as Perry Link puts it. A year into classes, I could barely string together a sentence, but my conception of human language was already wonderfully warped beyond recognition. There seemed to be native words for everything, and few clear cognates with or borrowings from other languages. There were complex tones. Putting the mantra back in Mandarin, I would play an audio file on loop and mutter the same syllable hundreds of times. Ma, 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 ma. There were chengyu, the elaborate four-syllable phrases derived from classical Chinese, but often used in contemporary speech, distilling poetry and wisdom into the tiniest spaces. Yi zhiqiu, from one leaf's fall you know that it's autumn. From a single sign comes the wider revelation. As for reading and writing, over 50,000 characters attested across a 3,000-year written tradition, you're not sufficiently obsessed until you're constantly tracing them with a wagging finger in the air, each stroke in the proper order. Far from being ideograms that represent meanings directly through images, characters are intricately entangled with the spoken language. Basic literacy is sometimes said to mean memorizing a minimum of 3,000, which is still no guarantee of being able to read a newspaper article. I moved to Beijing for 6 months of full-time language study, under a pledge to speak English only on phone calls home. By then I could carry on a conversation, exhausting myself in the process, but it was easier to discuss economic development than to give directions. I still bludgeoned every other sentence, could only dream of nuance, and was haunted by the feeling, in the city's cold, smoky beauty, that I was just translating from the nonstop English ticker running through my head. Even when I did almost sound like a native speaker, did it make any sense for me to sound that way? For the first but not the last time, I faced the unmistakable connection between language, identity, and appearance. Mandarin may eventually become a global language beyond the global Chinese diaspora, but for now, anyone who speaks it without looking Chinese is a curiosity, an anomaly, a question mark. Reactions veer quickly from total incomprehension to overblown praise, while Chinese Americans are unfairly expected to be fluent. One day in Beijing, I went to a talk by the legendary Chinese linguist Sun Hongkai. At first, I was just trying to keep up with his Mandarin. Only gradually did I grasp the life's work he was describing. Half a century spent documenting as many of China's approximately 300 languages as possible, hardly counting forms of Chinese. That was also the first time I heard the phrase endangered languages, 濒危语言. A few years later, with a little linguistics, I went to Southwest China as Professor Sun had. Chasing leads from scholars and street vendors, I took buses and shared jeeps from valley to valley across mountainous Yunnan province, home to over 100 languages. Finally, I came to Gongshan, the tiny seat of one of China's poorest counties. In this new frontier town of already rotting buildings, Han Chinese settlers were setting up shop and minority groups from surrounding villages were coming in search of work, education, healthcare, and consumer goods. Among them were speakers of Trung, whose homeland was a day's journey away by shared jeep on an unpaved road that was life-threatening in summer and impassable in winter. It was literally at the end of the road, on China's remote border with Tibet and a breakaway part of Myanmar, that the Trung world began. Working first through Mandarin, I gradually learned to speak some of the language, which is only distantly related to Chinese, Tibetan, Burmese, and hundreds of other little-known languages in the Tibeto-Burman family.